All right, everybody. I believe we're live here. I am so pleased today to welcome Professor Debra Richtmeyer for our first Q&A. She's been professor at University of Illinois since 1991. As an international soloist and a musician, she's past president and honorary lifelong member of NASA, adjudicator at the Dinant competition, Londex, Fischoff, Saxco, NASA, you name it. And just a prolific professor and a wonderful human being. So I'm so happy to welcome Debra Richtmeyer.
Welcome and thank you. It's great to be here.
So I thought before we would jump into the competition, to the questions, maybe you could give us a little bit of background about yourself, other than what I read.
Okay, well, I'm from Marquette, Michigan, where I grew up with parents who were both band directors. And you might find it interesting, if you don't already know this story, that I started saxophone in 4th grade. My dad started me, but I met Fred Hemke in 5th grade when he soloed with my dad's wind ensemble at Northern Michigan University. Oh. And I started on a curved soprano saxophone. And of course, Dr. Hemke was really interested. Let me see it, let me see it. And I was petrified he was going to ask me to play, but thank God he didn't. And anyway, I really loved his playing. He played the Creston Concerto with my dad's band, and it stuck with me. And so when I was a junior in high school, I asked my parents if I could go to Northwestern summer camp, and they said yes. And I got to work with Dr. Hemke for 3 weeks, and he said, "You're going to Northwestern," and that was it. So he convinced my parents, and I went to Northwestern, and from there I taught at Lawrence Conservatory for 1 year, and then I taught at North Texas for 10 years, and now this is my 29th year at University of Illinois.
Wow. So had you had any interactions with any other saxophone professors in the state of Michigan? I mean, Michigan obviously has a long history of great saxophone teaching and playing. Had you worked with anybody else there?
No, actually, I did, of course, know of Donald Sinta, and I was very familiar with his recording, and I loved it. It was one of the very first recordings that I had, and I listened to it a lot. But you have to remember that Marquette, Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, that's about 12-hour drive. It's a long way. And so I had never had the opportunity to go down there or meet him or hear him play or anything. And things were very different back then. We didn't have the internet, FaceTime, all of these things that YouTube that makes the world smaller for us as saxophonists. And so getting a chance to meet Dr. Hemke and work with him, that's what worked for me. The connection was great. And as I always tell my students, you know, go take a lesson, see what it's like. You know, is what they're telling you make sense to you musically, artistically? Do you have a good connection as human beings? And we did. And so I didn't have to go any further, and I didn't.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. So we can go ahead and jump into some of the questions that we have been provided. As most of us know, you are writing a new book, soon to be published by Presser. Could you, give us talk about some topics in your latest book, like anything? Obviously, it's a pedagogical work, so any of your specific techniques or things you'd like to talk about?
Well, yeah, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how it even came about. The first original idea for this came 10 years ago, actually, from Dr. Michael Bovenzi, who was a former student of mine. And he really believed in my teaching techniques and was using them successfully with his students. And he said, "You need to write a book." And so he got me thinking about it, and I tried writing it for a couple of years, and I just found it really difficult to write down what I do so experientially. I hear what I hear, and then I react to it, and we go from there. And then some family issues, illnesses came about, and kind of the whole project just went by the wayside on my side. And I just didn't really think I was going to be able to do it. And then about 4 years ago, I was performing and doing a master class at the Atlanta Saxophone Day for Dr. Jan Barry Baker. And Dr. Connie Frigo, who's also a former student of mine, came up to me afterwards, after the master class. She says, oh my gosh, you have to write a book. And I'm like, oh my God, here we go again.
She knows that you had previously been working on that?
No, she didn't know anything. She just saw what I had done and said, you need to write a book about your teaching techniques. And so I explained to her the difficulty I'd had in putting things down on paper. And she said, well, I'll see if I can help you. And so let's see if we can do this. And so she actually flew out to Illinois and watched me teach for an entire week, every lesson, every studio class, pedagogy class, everything. And she says, my, this is like getting a doctorate. So many new ideas that you have since when I studied with you, and this is great. And the point of it was so that when I started sending her chapters and she read them, she knew whether or not I was, what I was talking about, what I was trying to convey. And so I wrote down the different things that I wanted to do, kind of expanded from what I started with. So all the fundamentals, this book is actually now in 2 volumes. It's expanded. It's 26 chapters. And Presser said, I think we need to put it in 2 volumes so that people aren't walking around with a 300-page book. And so I thought really long and hard about how I was going to split up the chapters. And what it ended up being is volume 1 is fundamentals, such as vibrato, posture, embouchure, blowing your air, your tone, your intonation, articulation, rhythm, all those good things. And then also teaching techniques. So it's fundamentals and teaching techniques. And the idea between the first volume is that it's applicable for high school students and their teachers and band directors, as well as people teaching methods courses at the university level. And there's dozens of photos and examples about posture and embouchure and how to put the saxophone together. And my whole philosophy of teaching fundamentals, which really what I found is I have a particular, what I call an ideal oral cavity, which it makes articulation, vibrato, intonation, and tone all much easier, altissimo. It helps every one of them. And so what I'm always looking for, my favorite combination, as my students will tell you, they hear a lot, is I'm looking for what sounds best and is easiest to do so that we can play in an effortless manner and not have to work any harder than we need to so that we can focus on what we're saying through the music. And that comes to the next part of the book, the volume. It's practice and performance techniques. And it really encompasses my whole philosophy of practicing with artistic intention, so that from day one, you're integrating your artistic intention of music with developing the technique and getting it in your ear and getting the emotional and physical muscle memory. Because what happens between the notes and what you're doing with your air and your tone and vibrato has so much to do with what you're saying through the music. And so often I found young students come to me, they really are thinking about the notes. And they learn the piece thinking about the notes. And then they try to add the artistry later. And by then you've already put in the physical memory, muscle memory, and the emotional muscle memory that has nothing to do with what you really want to say through the music, and you have to slow it down and change everything. My philosophy is my whole teaching steps and strategies, it's about learning faster, making progress, and enjoying the journey. And so many young students find that they're frustrated when they practice. And when I see a student that's really frustrated, I know it's because they really don't know how to practice and they're not making progress. Because when we are expressing from our heart, we're figuring out that puzzle, it's doing discovery of the music, figuring it all out, it's fun. Yeah. What's not fun is when we're beating our head against the wall and not making any progress and we know we don't sound good. That's not fun. Yeah, so there, I know we're only halfway through the 2 volumes right now, but I have several questions, just about what you said so far, which is, could you go further into what you consider the ideal oral cavity? Do you model that through syllables, or is there a certain, like, how do you address that? Well, there's several different techniques to help people, and I have little tricks and tips for people to try to help them discover what works best for them, because none of us are the same inside our mouths or our oral cavities. So we have to find what specifically works for us. but I find it's finding the three parts of inside that working together in harmony that makes all of these things easier and sound better. And that is what you're doing with your throat. You know, I always think, you know, doing the mini yawn or envisioning a ping pong ball lifting and expanding so you're not tight back there. And what the shape of your tongue position is when you say ah, you know, how steep that toboggan slide is, I like to call it, if this is your reed and this is the tip of your tongue. And then also the backs of the sides of your tongue and where those are. And so if those are all working together, life is so much better and easier. And you don't have to keep making changes to just get a note out or to fix the intonation or even get vibrato or articulation. So sometimes if I'm working on someone with vibrato and I ask them to say ya, 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 which is the purpose of that is to just hear what their tongue shape is, the vowel that they're using, and to find where the backs of the sides of the tongue are and envisioning the oral cavity. If they do that, and then I have them go back and do vibrato and maybe do some scoops to make sure they're using their embouchure in the right way, 9 times out of 10, it instantly solves the problem.
Yeah.
If they're still struggling with it a little, I might have them go up into the altissimo on a high G. Maybe it'll be their first time playing a G, and that's really a high five moment and fun. And have them tongue quarter notes and see if they can do it without cracking on it. Mm-hmm. And if they are, sometimes it's because they're tonguing incorrectly. So we'll address, okay, where are you hitting the reed? Where is it hitting your tongue? And those things. And they all circle back and help each other. Right. And all of a sudden he or she can tongue on those quarter notes and the high G, and we go back and do the vibrato again, and lo and behold, that's better. Or the articulation down low is better. They all circle around and help each other. So it's kind of exciting. So
it's attacking a problem from several different angles, obviously. Right. But it's to me what it sounds like, and one of the biggest struggles just for wind players in general is establishing a true connection between what you feel and what's actually going on, being able to identify clearly what you're doing.
Right, and another technique that I use that's really helpful is to have them take the mouthpiece off and have them see what pitch they're playing. And a lot of them will be familiar with the concept of playing a concert A or a concert B flat on their mouthpiece, but they'll play it soft. And that doesn't really teach what I want them to learn, because I can play all kinds of different pitches on my mouthpiece soft without being necessarily in what I would call my ideal oral cavity. If I ask them to play that concert A triple forte and get as much resonance with the least amount of effort as possible, then they have to have those back of the sides of the tongue where they belong, the oral cavity, everything has to come in. What usually happens immediately is when they get loud, they go flat. And it's because of the back of the sides of the tongue aren't where they belong. Yeah. And by lifting giving those simple instructions and them trying to match the pitch, 9 times out of 10, again, they find the pitch, the volume, the resonance all comes together, and I say, what'd you do? And it's the back of the sides of the tongue. And it's like, well, I could have guessed that, or I knew that. And then I say, okay, put it back on your neck. Don't blow that hard, because I am an advocate of warm air versus cold air when we play. And we might have to change where the mouthpiece goes on the neck, because sometimes they have the mouthpiece on so far onto the neck to compensate for flatness it's caused by not having an ideal oral cavity, that everything up high is so sharp. And then they refocus to bring those notes down, and it actually just makes the other notes flatter and everything gets more difficult. So if I have them pull out and find where they can play the octave middle C in tune without changing, and it's usually a little further out than they were before we did the mouthpiece exercise, then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I can play that C major scale with you in tune with the do, and they couldn't do it the first time before we experimented with this, and they have a better sound. And their vibrato is better. And I mean, it circles around. And like you said, it's attacking it from different angles and seeing what works.
Sure. There was also something I heard in your answer, which was between the notes.
Yes.
I know that's a huge part of your teaching philosophy and expression and phrase shape. And hope I'm not betraying too much information when I know that that was one of the potential titles of the book, but can you tell us what the book's actually called?
Well, on the advice of Theodore Presser, we've changed the title, and the title now is The Richtmeyer Saxophone Method, Essential Steps and Strategies for Developing Fundamentals, Technique, and Artistry. And as I said, it's in 2 volumes. Volume 1 is Fundamentals and Teaching Techniques, and Volume 2 is Practice and Performance Techniques. Yeah. And although I still am in love with the title Between the Notes, the feeling was that it didn't necessarily tell people right off the bat, what's the book about?
Sure.
And they felt it was too esoteric, and even though I love it. Yeah. And my feeling about Between the Notes is that's where the artistry lies. And a lot of my teaching, as you know, is about how you connect to the next note and being able to do that, or whether you're lifting between notes, because that's a different character and style. And that comes down to how you use your air and your intention from your artistic, your ear, your soul, everything. And so developing the ability to do different connections between notes, to say different things artistically, is very important.
Of course, yeah. So, and that, I think, as you mentioned this, that was the kind of where you leave off at the end of the first volume, right? And then the second volume, where do we go from there?
Well, as I said, it's about practice and performance techniques. And so the first chapter is about warming up. I have found that so many students really don't know how to warm up, and their warm up is actually practicing. And so it tears down their endurance rather than getting them ready to play with endurance. And the goal being, by the time I'm done warming up, I sound great. Everything's easy, effortless. I can play the different volumes. My vibrato's sounding good. I'm in tune. I can play the altissimo. And it's all about getting my body ready, as well as my mental, and different exercises that you can do for that. There's a lot of exercises in there. And then the next 2 chapters are really involved in that practicing with artistic intention, all the different steps that I use, an explanation of them. And then the companion chapter to that, putting the steps and goals into action, actually has dozens of examples where I'm taking the student through practicing 4 different pieces, excerpts, and using those steps. And I will show with circles around if it's a fermata note or whatever, and specifically what they're supposed to do in that step, and a reminder what to be focusing on, and taking them through learning the piece in that manner, so that they learn it faster and better than they've probably ever done in their life. And then the 4th example, they have to use those steps on their own, see how they did. And then there's a checklist afterwards. Well, did you do this? Did you do this? And just to take them through, did they remember to do those different things? And of course, part of that's recording yourself and listening to it back. But I've showed it to a few former students who they actually went through both chapters, and they just found it incredibly helpful as a tool to teach students how to use all those different steps, because the more you use them, the easier they become. And again, it's doing discovery, and you can apply that to the next piece. It's something that my goal when I'm teaching students is to teach them how to become their own teachers. Teach them how to fish, don't hand them a fish. Right. And so it takes a while to really show them all the different ways you can implement these techniques and steps and strategies. But by taking them through the different examples, they can really get an idea of it quicker without me being there taking them through it.
Right. Yeah. And so I remember certainly with you and also with Dr. Hemke, in lessons, there was a Socratic method to it, right? Is leading you without giving you the info, like helping you on your way to discovering it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so one of those methods that I remember working on with you was finding a hierarchy of important notes within a phrase, like
skeleton, yes.
Through. I hope that's one of them, because I always found that very valuable in lessons.
Absolutely. The skeleton is very much in there, and how to find it in different examples to show you not only how to find it, but how to get it then into your ear.
Mm.
Because knowing what it is intellectually or seeing it on the page is not the same as actually practicing that skeleton, as if that was the melody without all of the interior things, and seeing, well, how would I play that? How would I use my air? And getting your ear to be able to hear that, so that when you do add the interior notes, your ear knows where it's going.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And, you know, backing up just a little bit when you're talking about warm-ups, I think one of the things that's very easy, an easy trap to fall into is routines can become mindless if we let them.
Yes.
You know, if you have, well, I'm going to do long tones for 15 minutes, I'm going to do scales for 15 minutes, whatever, however long you spend on your warm-ups. I find that one of the greatest challenges, I mean, even for myself still, like I have to remind myself from time to time, all right, get your head in the game, don't just go through the motions. Is having the intention from the minute you put the horn to your face, an expectation of sound, an expectation of shapes. So is there any tips you can give to anybody who's has a warm-up that might feel stale or?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I actually struggled with writing that chapter because I don't have a specific, I do this, 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 and this in my warm-up. My warm-up is very improvisational. And it's based upon listening and feeling and getting it myself to be able to sound and express what sounds good and feels good. And the first thing that I usually will start out with is a C major scale full range with the tuner sounding my C. And the goal is, and I start at moderate volume, not too loud, whatever volume I sound immediately the best with the least amount of effort. And I'm going through it, the whole entire scale, looking for where my mouthpiece needs to be for me to be in tune. And if I'm doing this on a regular basis, I already know where my mouthpiece belongs. But that can change slightly depending on your read or the day, but it's not going to change much.
Sure.
And then I might stop on certain notes and do some vibrato or a scoop to get things to warm up and stretch a little bit. My oral cavity to stretch a little, my facial muscles to stretch a little. It's just like when you're getting ready to run a 4-minute mile, you don't walk on the track and run a 4-minute mile to warm up to run your 4-minute mile. Your body will rebel.
Right.
So my whole goal is to be able to express from my heart wall, getting my body to sound better and better and better in sound and in vibrato, and I'm doing the scoops, and maybe I'll go in the altissimo, and the last thing I'll add is some articulation, because sometimes articulation can tend to tighten us up. So I want to make sure that everything is, I can play forte effortlessly. I can get ready for that high F in the gloss, and I'll be, my body's ready and I can just do it, but I don't start there. I'll do some scoops and chromatically through my palm keys and doing crescendos until my body goes, okay, I'm ready, here it comes. And I can just do it. I don't force it. And I think that's where, if you say, okay, you got to do this for 5 minutes and this for 5 minutes and this for 5 minutes, you're not listening to your body, and you might actually do things that hurt you. Versus really the goal is to get yourself ready to practice.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really important point, is that also it seems to me that depending on the rep that you're playing, that you're working on, your warm-ups to practice that can and should change. You know? Yes.
And it depends what you're warming up for. And a crucial part of that I didn't mention is that you need to play a little rest, play a little rest, play a little rest. And so I'm listening to what I feel like. If I play a little and I start to feel fatigued, I know I need to take a break, even if it's 30 seconds or a minute, even if I've only been playing a couple minutes. Maybe my muscles are tired from a big workout yesterday. Right. More hours than I normally do. And so I'll walk around, maybe I'll do some score study, maybe I'll work on a read, I'll come back and I'll play a little more. And sometimes I need to rest 5 or 10 minutes, or maybe after I've kind of played rest for 15 or 20 minutes and it still doesn't feel great yet, maybe I'll come back to it a half an hour later and see, well, is it starting to feel better now? Sometimes it takes a while, versus and then it feels better, versus if I kept trying to push through that next half hour, maybe I would have made myself be done for the day.
Right. Right.
And the other thing too to keep in mind when I'm warming up is the longer I have to, what I'm preparing for, I mean, if I'm preparing for a practice session where I can just stop anytime I need to physically, no, that's not so big a deal. But if I'm preparing for something where I need to be able to play for 50 minutes and I'm on stage and I can't stop in the middle of that, no rests piece. If
Right.
I feel tired, I want to make sure that I'm ready to not be tired all the way through. And so I'm going to take a longer time for my warm up, lots more breaks and
Right.
much more slow warm up.
I remember one of the things I don't remember if it was every semester, it was certainly every year, and it may have been every semester, but one of our early studio classes that we always had was you would give a presentation on stretching.
Ah, yes.
And I talk with my students about this all the time now. And of course, when you're 19 or 20, you just don't feel the same way as you do as you get further on in your career, let's say. And all of a sudden, during my warm-ups, I actually stretch now when I'm taking a break. I stretch my arms. I'll kind of do the gravity stretches, leaning over. Do you do any of those too? Any physical stretch?
Yeah, and it talks about in the book too, doing even sometimes even before I do anything, I'll just sit for a minute and meditate for a minute and just breathe and just get myself to relax, because maybe we're feeling stressed out mentally as well as physically before we've even started. And you just have to listen to what works for you. But I definitely do a little bit of stretching before I play, in my breaks of my warm up, after my warm up, maybe halfway through my practice session at the end. And it really varies on what age you are and just your own muscle structure, because some people are just more flexible than others. And when you're 18 and 19, it's the same as sports. We have to be athletes as well as artists, and you can abuse your body at 18 and get away with it in terms of, okay, you recover faster. That's just a fact. Your muscles recover faster. And as you get older, they don't recover as fast, but the good news is we're a lot more efficient in learning music.
Right.
I don't have to practice as many hours now to learn a piece as I did when I was younger. Thank God, because my body won't do that anymore. But that's the good news, is we do get more efficient. But I can tell you to a person, when we go through those stretching exercises afterwards, I always hear back from students, oh, thank you for doing that. I was having trouble with my neck and it's feeling so much better. And so it's awareness is half the battle.
Yeah, sure. And, for what it's worth, I'm willing to admit this in front of everybody we're talking to, that I hear you in the back of my mind when I wake up sore, like, someday this isn't going to feel the same way. I feel, I need those stretches a lot more than I did when I was 18, for sure.
Absolutely.
So are there any other topics in your book that you'd like to explore? I have a couple other techniques that I remember you either working on with me or with studio members when I was there.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the teaching section in the first volume, there's a section on teaching masterclasses. There's a chapter on how to coach a quartet. In the volume 2, there's developing your technique and avoiding injury, and preparing for recitals and concertos and auditions. And another important thing is connecting with audiences, and that's tied into overcoming anxiety on stage. And this was something that took me a long time to figure out, and really was huge in my own personal playing, and has made a big difference in my students. And that is, it used to be for me, when I would practice in my practice room, I was totally in the moment, totally expressing myself. And I really felt that I loved what I was doing. But what I didn't realize what I was doing is I was really only in my own world doing that. And so when I would walk on stage and all of a sudden there's an audience looking at me, it's like, holy cow. And it kind of, the energy of it and the awareness of it made it difficult for me to do what I could naturally do in my own practice room, because I tend to be more introverted that way. And what I learned is that in my own practice room, I invite the audience in. So when I'm doing the repetitions and I'm now by the second or third or fourth repetition of an idea, I am totally changing my focus to what I'm saying. I'm also changing my focus to I am playing it specifically for the audience or for a particular person, depending on how intimate the music is. And so I get used to that connection. And the first time I recorded myself specifically connecting to the audience as I played in my practice room, I was absolutely flabbergasted, because when I listened to it back as the listener, I was so moved by it. I had goosebumps and the whole thing, and my whole analytical part of my brain shut off, which is great. And I really, really felt. And so that made a huge difference. Now I'm backstage and I'm getting into the character as who the character, what I'm going to say through that music. And I'm inviting the audience in before I even walk on stage energetically. And then when I walk on stage and start playing, it's like when you've played a concert 20 times, it's comfortable.
Right.
Well, I've done it 20 times because I did it in my practice room. So even the first time, I'm more comfortable. I am comfortable. And this was a huge thing for overcoming nerves for so many students, because if you're truly being that character, let's say the character that you're playing through the music, and the composer wants you to be heroic, the confidence and the exhilaration and all those things of that character, if you're truly being that character and truly speaking through the music as that character, that there's no room to be nervous, because that character wouldn't be nervous.
Right.
And so that really, if you are truly embodying being that character and saying through the music what that character is saying, it gets rid of those nerves. And therefore your adrenaline heightens those emotions rather than changes them. And again, that comes back to many people, and this is not original for me, but I do believe that all emotions come from two basic emotions: love and fear. Mm-hmm. So by concentrating on it coming from that space, it's more enjoyable to play, and you connect with other people. Now, if a composer asks me to play with a fear-based emotion, aggression to the point of being mean, I'll honor that. But if there's any way that I can couch it from an emotional roadmap through the story that maybe that character then finds love, I'll go for it.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Well, so great. I would, one of the things I remember you doing was specifically regarding pulse and rhythm. Mm. And I remember you would often, if students, even if they had spent the time with the metronome, and really worked it through, oftentimes students would play and they would have issues with pulse or playing together with piano. And I remember you going through and moving with them, asking them to physically embody the pulse and to move as they play. Is that something that you address in there? Is that something you'd like to talk about here?
It's definitely addressed in the book because it's really, really important. It's about rhythm and time. Mm-hmm. And the difference between steady time and good time, they are both very, very important. Some pieces will demand steady time where it's unwavering. And some pieces, you want that freedom to move, but the audience has to feel where you're going, or the conductor and the other musicians have to feel where you're going, even before you go there, or as you're going there. It's like you're the lead dancer, and your partner can feel where you're moving them. And so that's really important. And so often this comes back to practice techniques again. I find that students turn the metronome on day one. And so they're really concentrating on it having that steady time, but they're not really hearing what they're playing. They don't know what the skeleton is. They haven't played notes with fermatas. Maybe you got 16th notes, and I'll put a fermata on the first time through, every other 16th note, and I'm sitting on that note till my ear is telling me, okay, I got it. You are important, or I'm getting rid of you the next time because you're a passing note. And then I'll go back and I will only go as far as my ear can hear and then can remember. And then I will start removing fermatas. And that's why I'm finding that skeleton. And I do not have the metronome on. And then I'm working on what I'm saying as I'm listening. And when I finally get to the point in a phrase where I feel like I know what I want to say and I'm able to say it, my final step is now we need to address the rhythm and time. I might be doing approximately the correct rhythms, approximately the right time, but that doesn't mean that someone else could follow me. So then there's that step that I call dancing the music, where I will put the metronome on, starting a little bit slower than where I'm aiming for eventually, but still with this, going for the same character and expression. And I'll actually have my hips move like a pendulum back and forth, trying not to move my upper body too much so I can still play. It's kind of like marking time in a marching band. Mm-hmm. And I'll do that with the metronome. And it's so interesting the first time you try this, because you can all of a sudden feel when you start rushing or dragging and you're not in the ictus of where your hip just went. And it's like, whoa, I'm not in the pocket. Versus you can ignore a metronome really easily.
Right.
And I find it really helps me solidify what my time internally. So I'm no longer dependent on the metronome. And then I'll turn the metronome off and dance it again. So now I have some more freedom. And then I'll stand still and record myself and listen to it back and say, can I conduct this, or can I dance to this? And I discover whether when I can, I'm ready to get with orchestra or conductor or pianist or another instrumentalist. And I made this technique for me, because I would find when I was younger that adrenaline would make me rush, because I wasn't focusing on who I was as a character and connecting with the audience and all the things that I've learned over all these decades. And it would just make me go faster. And I'd listen to the recording back and be like, holy cow, I am flying. And it's not what I meant to do. And so this really helped me. And I didn't tell my students about it for a really long time, because I thought they'd think I was totally insane. And finally, I started sharing it with my students and making them do it. And of course, a lot of, especially men, really don't like doing it at first, because you want me to dance. And, but eventually, because if I can't dance to what they're playing, then no audience is going to be able to feel it. No conductor is going to be able to feel it. So yeah, when they're playing, if I can dance to it and it makes sense and they can lead me through their rubatos, great. But I will say, every single person that's ever actually tried this, even with their initial reluctance, their rhythm got better and they became an advocate. And I just love it when the older students tell the freshmen, just do it, it works.
Right, exactly. Well, so that's fantastic. We should probably move on to a couple of other questions here. One of them was, can you identify and talk about any formative experiences that help shape your career trajectory? What set you on your path?
Well, sure. I've already told you a little bit about meeting Fred Hemke, and that certainly had a big impact on me. And I would just like to say, as a basic thing, that everybody try to find as many experiences as you can, because you just never know what you're going to learn from it. And in hindsight, so many things that I did, sometimes just for the money, I learned so much. And sometimes it wasn't for the money, but it was because my teacher told me to do it. For instance, I was a junior at Northwestern, and Hemke said, you're going to go to this GOP International Saxophone Competition. And I didn't know anything about it. They weren't as well known as they are today. And so I learned the 11 pieces and went to France on my second time on an airplane ever. And I made the cut. I made the semifinals, the top 12. And that's where I first met Claude Delong, because he was one of those 12 also. And I met Jean-Marie Landex, because he really liked my Caprice en forme de valse and my Des Enclos. And I met Marcel Mule and Guy Lecour, because I played Lecour's piece. And I just learned so much, things that I didn't know that then later helped me to prepare students for competitions. And we hosted the World Saxophone Congress when I was a senior at Northwestern, and that was an eye-opening experience. And here's another thing I always tell my students, you never know when a job that you take will lead to a bigger job. And the end of my senior year, I took the position teaching at a summer camp called Camp Botawagama in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And Fred Sturm was there, and he was the jazz director at Lawrence Conservatory. He heard me play and teach a master class and liked it. And he called me up a couple of weeks later and said, our saxophone / oboe teacher just retired out of nowhere. Can you come teach saxophone half-time starting in the fall? Will you come play for the dean to audition for the job? So of course, I drove up, played, got the position, and then they offered it to me full-time at the end of the year. And at the same time, I had applied for North Texas, and I won that position. And so going down to North Texas was another huge thing for me, because the Dallas Symphony is based there, 30 miles from Denton. And after I'd been there a couple of weeks, I received a phone call from the personnel manager of the Dallas Symphony saying, Maestro Mata heard about you, why don't you come down and play for him? And so I went down and played Bolero and pictures at an exhibition for him, and got hired to do those pieces and record the very next month. And this is a time back then, it's different now, fortunately, but back then, most orchestras hired their clarinetists to play saxophone. And because of that experience, I grew so much. I got to play over 100 concerts with them over 10 years. And I learned so much about blend and vibrato and when to lead and when to be a part of the group, and rhythm, and the difference between playing in an orchestra versus playing in a band. You play in a band and here's the ictus. You play in an orchestra, there's the ictus, what you see, and then the orchestra plays a split second later all together. And it totally freaked me out the first time. But then you learn how to do it. And I just, it was like getting a doctorate just playing in that orchestra. And it was a wonderful experience, and I just learned a ton. So that was huge. And playing backup for entertainers. I played for dozens of different entertainers, Barry, saxophone, flute, clarinet, bass clarinet, and played in the Chicago Bears jazz band for 3 years while I was going to Northwestern. And it was just, I learned, had a good time, made money. It was a win-win for me. And those experiences, I think, have informed my playing, because a lot of our pieces have jazz influence, and just seeing the performers on stage, that they're making a lot of money, so they're doing something right. Their stage presence and their charisma and all those things. It's all about learning and growing, and I'm still trying to learn and grow every day as a person and a player and a teacher, and that's what keeps it interesting.
And once you moved to Illinois, you played with St. Louis
for several years.
Yeah,
that was great. Eventually I just got too busy, but now I have people like you playing with them, and then several other former students, and so that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, you're talking about learning from the members of the orchestra. One of the difficult things that I have found, depending on the hall and depending on the ensemble, and where you're sitting on stage, that delay can be a big deal. And Susan Slaughter, who was principal trumpet in St. Louis for, gosh, it may have been 50 years. She was amazing.
Yes, she was.
Amazing. And she had this great tip that kind of seemed so obvious in hindsight, but was so profound for me, that she said the best thing to do is set a metronome and your record. At that time, it was probably a mini disc player or whatever else when she was talking to me, but right down next there and walk 40 feet away and play with the metronome. It kind of blew my mind. And it was so important. So yeah, that resonates with me so much, how much you learn from the people around you.
Well, and learning to really listen and be a cog in that wheel versus what you see. Right. And learning that what you see is what is going to come up, not what's happening right now.
Right.
And that just takes experience.
Right.
You don't learn that in the practice room.
Right. And the depth of craft that goes into making the live thing as well. It's just, yeah. So that's fantastic. One of the other questions that we thought was really good was, what was your advice for developing quartets or other chamber ensembles?
Yeah. I love saxophone quartet. It was one of my favorite things when I was a student, and after I was a student, as I had my own quartet, um, I learned probably more playing in quartet than anything. You learn how to lead, you learn how to follow, you learn how to blend, you learn how to tune chords with, you know, the third being lowered and all of those good things. And it's also like a family. So I loved that interactive part of it too. But I think a lot of what we did when I was a student and when I was playing soprano, I still do in my coaching. And so one is score study, so important. All the members of the have to have done some score study and see who has the melody when and be writing that in your part. And then another thing I love to do is have two players play. Okay, let's hear what the soprano baritone player sound like doing that. Then have two different players, maybe a three, or maybe you see that it's hocketed. There's 16th notes that get carried through all the different voices. How about everybody only play when they have 16th notes, and let's see if we can make that sound like one line. Yeah. And those kinds of things where you begin to really see how those handoffs need to happen and how the volume from one person, okay, you play your last note of that handoff, you play your first note, and let's match the pitch and the volume and the color. And just taking time to do that so that then when you do try to do it in context, you have a much better idea of what volume and what intonation, all those things, and learning about relative intonation. I find that when I'm working with any new group, well, especially young groups, they don't even know about lowering the third of a major chord. And so showing them how to tune an octave, and then let's add the fifth in there, and then let's add the third and have them lower it till they can all hear. They don't have to know the science behind it, that it's in tune. And then, okay, now imagine the next half step up. And then we do the next chord. Everybody imagining the next half step up. Because that, if they are hearing the next half step, the chords stay in tune. If I don't give them that instruction and just say, okay, now play up a half step, another half step, the chords invariably become out of tune because now they're on a sharp note or now they're on a flat note. And they don't know what to do because their ear is confused by what they're hearing them play, which is wrong. Mm-hmm. So if they're imagining how to play that, where that pitch is, and then they maintain that. Same thing with practicing at as I mentioned, that C major scale with the tuner. I'm developing my ability to hear the fourth, the fifth, the octave off of that drone and learning that ear training and other exercises that I have that I do with the piano to increase my ability to be able to sing and hear intervals. And then, of course, everybody in the group feeling free and safe to make comments, right. Learning how to make constructive criticism without being mean, and how to value each other's, I mean, it's a family, and how to value each other's comments and listening to it back. It's so different when you're in the middle playing versus when then you step back and listen to recording of the group and hearing how you actually fit into everything. It's a very different experience, and you learn a lot from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of quartet, and obviously you've been involved and judged a lot of chamber competitions, but also a lot of solo competitions that we mentioned at the top. One of the other questions that was brought up was how has judging these prestigious international, national, chamber and solo competitions, how has it shaped your teaching? Has it shaped your teaching, and if so, how?
Well, I don't know if I would say it shaped it, but it has confirmed and what I already feel is about the importance of the artistry in music. Because one of the things that when I was preparing for an international competition and then people playing at international competitions, there's that desire appropriately to play everything accurately. In tune, good rhythm, all the right notes, consistently, all of those things, so important. But sometimes we can put pressure on ourselves so much about playing perfectly that we lose the focus of what we're trying to express through the music. And we start to fear making a mistake. And that fear of being judged or fear of making a mistake totally impedes what you're doing as an artist.
Mm.
So changing my expectation from it needing to be perfect to it going for excellence, and what I want to say through the music. And what I found in doing these competitions, that the higher the level of the judges, yes, they have that expectation of excellence, if not perfection technically, but they're still human beings. And you hear the same piece played over and over and over and over, and you start to fatigue as a judge. And all of a sudden, a person comes out, plays that piece. It's the 50th time you've heard it in a row, and they touch your heart. And it's like a breath of fresh air and a cup of coffee, and you're revitalized, and it moves you, and it means something. And that's what we should be aspiring to, whether we're playing at any level, whether we're an intermediate level player or world-class player. It's about connecting and moving people. And I think that's what it's all about for judges too.
Yeah, sure, of course. Well, so we are at 2:52 right now, and it has gone by in a flash. I thought maybe for the last little stretch here, we could just open it up to anybody if they wanted to type in the chat, to ask some questions. But is there anything that you would like to otherwise leave them with in terms of your own thoughts about that? I think that was what you left with was kind of perfect. But if there's anything else you feel like you haven't expressed, you could share that.
The only thing that I would just leave you with, which is in line with what I've been talking about, is to not underestimate the importance of recording and listening to yourself before you get on stage. I know when I'm practicing and going through those various steps and working on a small section, as soon as I get to the point where I think it sounds pretty good and I'm not sure what else to do to it now, that's when I might have the recorder going the whole time, but I'm not listening to most of it. That's when I'll go back and listen to that last time through. Mm-hmm. And there's always little things that I want to tweak. And it also helps me see the larger picture of whether the emotional roadmap and the journey I'm taking the listener on is working. And as well as maybe technical things like vibrato and intonation and rhythm, but all those things. And so then I'll go back and do it again and listen to it back. And usually by the third or fourth time of doing it, and it doesn't take long because I'm talking small amounts, I smile. And it's like, ooh, that's it. What a difference. If I hadn't recorded myself, it wouldn't have gotten it to that level. And it also builds my confidence because now I know I like how it sounds. I know it's good. I'm not making myself vulnerable to what everybody else thinks. I like what I'm doing. I'm confident with what I'm doing. I'm confident with what I have to share and express through the composer's intent, through my soul to you. And the naysayers become a non-issue. There's always going to be someone that doesn't like what you're doing, but that's not important.
So the recording is not only educational for you, it's also affirmational.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I will just make sure that I think one of the worst things that you can do in that respect, though, is the first time you record yourself on a piece is to play the whole piece through, record it, listen to it back. It's a depressing thing to do because you hear so many things you don't like. You can't remember enough to know even how to fix it. And it's not a good way to do it. You want to make this positive, where it's a small amount. You can fix it right then. Good, move on. And then after you can start tying them together and then record the larger picture.
Right. Well, so we have a question here from Sheldon, and he mentioned earlier, you mentioned earlier that you're an advocate of warm versus cold air. He'd love to hear you expand a bit on this.
Yeah. Well, if this is not a new concept. A lot of very well-known educators out there have this pedagogical viewpoint, and think about fogging up a mirror. That's warm air versus shoving the air. And that works well when you're playing jazz, but in classical, it tends to make the sound a bit brittle, and it tends to bring out the sharp notes on the saxophone, and you use more air. I find that by using the warmer air, I can create more volume and last longer in the phrase. It takes me less air to create the volume. and my intonation and sound are better, and I have more flexibility, and it's less hard on my body, which again, endurance.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there also a physiological component to that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So here's a toughie that we'll throw at you. What do you think is the most challenging aspect of being an educator?
Being an educator?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Sometimes energy. I mean, I find you teach, you know, hour after hour, it's just exhausting. And sometimes challenging can be when you have a student that won't do what you ask them to do. That can be challenging, or they don't believe in themselves. And I think for me, or it's finding out what their goals are, what they're looking for, and finding out what's stopping them from practicing. Why aren't you practicing? You know, and sometimes it's a fear, sometimes it's they don't know how to practice. And so the challenge is figuring out where they're coming from and what makes them excited. What are their goals, and helping them. That's my goal, is to help them succeed with what they want. And sometimes the challenge is figuring that out, because maybe they don't even know what it is.
Sure. All right. How about one more? Is that okay?
Okay.
All right. Are there certain pieces you find continue to teach you things even after studying for many years?
Oh gosh, I could probably say that about every piece. I mean, really, it's so interesting. You know, I come back to a piece that I've played many, many times with multiple orchestras or with multiple pianists. Every time I come back to it, I hear new things. Because I'm a different person. I'm a different player. I'm a different musician. I've had more life experiences. And so those are the pieces that I gravitate towards, pieces that allow you to express your life experience. And yes, that it's about life. You know, I tend to not gravitate towards pieces that I feel are 100% intellectual. That can be interesting for a while, but after a while I get bored. I get bored really easily. So even with those, I'm always looking for, well, is there another level to this that I missed, and that you know, even though the composer maybe didn't even write it from a standpoint of artistic expression or emotion, maybe it's there. And so maybe that sometimes coming back to a piece that I did when I was younger and wasn't looking for that, maybe I will see it in a completely different way.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I find that when I come back to pieces and you're hearing different things because you're a different person, exactly as you said, one of the new challenges is breaking up the old mapping that you had. You know, it's the dissonance between what you hear now versus what you did before. At least for me, that's is finding that that ease. So anyway, thank you so much for doing this. It's so much great information, and it's great to catch up with you on here, and for everybody to hear your thoughts on this. So thank you. And hope to talk to you soon.
Well, let me say something before you turn us off. I want to thank you, because I think what you're doing in this is just incredible. And I'm really grateful, especially in this day and time right now where we are separated. And it is an anxious time, and it's a time when we are separated. And so many people that have so many wonderful things to say. Nobody knows it all. And just different viewpoints, different perspectives. And when we go to these conferences and these wonderful classes are happening, but maybe there's 8 other things that we're supposed to be at or want to be at, and they don't get shared. And you are providing an incredible opportunity for so many different people's viewpoints and expertise to be shared. And I want to thank you for doing this.
Well, that's so kind and meaningful. So thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.